Well, I love the notion of getting the chance to play Lois Riley. She's quite different than most of the characters that I get to play. I love the script and the way that it had these three characters, one from a younger generation and two from my own generation, and sort of a love story between these grown-ups, turning every page sure that he's going to screw that little girl, and then he never does. It really seemed like it would be so much fun to get in there and play around with them. Indeed it was. It was a great shoot.
Questions? Back here.
I'm an aspiring actor, and I really enjoyed your performance, and I was hoping that you would talk a little bit about how you prepare for a role and get sort of get
If you want to be an actor, if anything can stop you, let it. That's what they used to say to us in college. Preparing for Lois was fun. I didn't have a lot of time. Jake had been working for a little while with Jimmy and a short while with Kristen. We had some rehearsal days in New Orleans before we started shooting, but I pretty much just sort of dove in and found her with a lot of help from Robin Matthews and the hair, you know, dyeing her hair and straightening it out. It was one of the first things that Jake had brought up in conversation, and sort of my red curly hair had sort of preceded me for many years in my career, and Jake sort of ummed and erred, and could we do something about your hair? And I was like, yes! So I was excited to cut it off and straighten it and lighten it as was appropriate to her. I had never been to New Orleans. We actually shot the whole film down in New Orleans. I had never been down there before and was housed at the very lovely Windsor Court, which is a gated, in fact, hotel on the edges of the French Quarter. I would be picked up when I would go to work by a very nice young man named Sam that would drive me. The hotel room was covered in chintz and had a little kitchen in it, so with a couple of trips to the grocery store, I really didn't have to go out in New Orleans. So I could sort of sequester myself at the Windsor Arms, much in the way that Lois had, and that was a big help. So there was hair, there was costume, there was makeup. Those people in those meetings really helped me find her, and then the time and the place in which we were shooting. Working with Jimmy was really easy to sort of fabricate a long history of a relationship there without having to say too much. I think that one of the tricks of acting is when you can be informed by the player opposite you, the environment around you, the clothing you're asked to wear, so that there's not a lot of other work to add on top of it. When you're not supported in those kinds of ways, you sometimes have to start making up stories and things like that. It wasn't really necessary for that, for playing Lois.
Over here.
What was your favorite part of this movie after seeing it all together?
I kind of love the silent bits with Lois. I've never been asked to do very much comic work, and it certainly wasn't really scripted as comic work, but sometimes when I watch it, it's a little like getting a taste of what working in silent film might have been. And so it was really fun to shoot it, and watching it, which is what you asked, it's fun to watch that part. It's fun to watch the relationship unfold between Jimmy and Kristen, because I wasn't present for that. I had only read it, so each time I see it, I see new nuances in their performances as they play with each other.
Right here.
Kristen Stuart is a delightful young woman. She asked me what it was like working with Kristen. She's an eager young actor who knows an awfully lot and also knows she has a lot to learn. She absorbed from Jimmy and I every moment that she was around us. little does she know we were absorbing from her too. I had a funny experience in that I'm actually in another film that Kristen's in called Cake Eaters, which I don't know if you've ever seen, but I have a very, very small part in it, which was actually shot after the whole movie had been shot, and they decided they needed a sequence of the dead mother from when the children in the film were younger. And so I went and shot that half a day with Mary Stuart Masterson, and it got added on to the beginning of Cake Eaters. And just as we had started in New Orleans, I ran into Mary Stuart at a film festival in Woodstock and said, "Oh, Mary Stuart, you've got to meet this young actress, Kristen Stewart. She's just incredible. She's wonderful." Mary Stuart looks at me and says, "Well, she's in Cake Eaters." And she plays this extraordinary woman in Cake Eaters. It's, forget the name of the disease, but it's a nerve and motion control disease, and she's twisting her body throughout the entire playing of the role, and I literally didn't recognize her from one character to having actually met her down in New Orleans. I offered her my telephone number. I thought she was awfully young to be down there working on her own. It was the first role she had ever done without it being a legal matter that her parents or a guardian joined her. It was really and truly her first grown-up role, although her parents are very close with her and they did come down for a little while. But she never had to call me. She took very good care of herself. And it was delightful working with her. She's very talented and very dear.
Was there a question up back? Yeah.
So much of what we've seen recently that takes place in New Orleans on TV and movies is about New Orleans. And this isn't. The city's very much there, but it's not a movie about New Orleans. Can you tell us a little bit about how it came to be, if you know, a New Orleans film is supposed to maybe taking place in Vegas or wherever? And also, if there was any discussion or work considering what level to play in this city that really demands to be noticed so often?
Yeah, it's really, it's a shame that Jake isn't here to answer that question himself. I've heard him answer it a little bit, and I'm not going to remember the story very well. I don't think they purposely set the story in New Orleans. I think we had actually talked about shooting it in a few different cities. Louisiana had a very good tax rebate, and I think that was really a lot of the reason why they chose New Orleans in the end. And I think when Jake was satisfied that he could have the Indiana work also play there in and around the city, I think he opted to do it, but it was never a big part of what the story was. It's kind of an appropriate city for Doug to have traveled to, but it wasn't really an intention. And I think that in that way, Jake never intended to make a film about the city of New Orleans, but that's where we were, and I think he uses it really rather beautifully as a backdrop.
Up back.
What was it like playing the role of Lois compared to your role in Rosie River?
Sort of like eating an apple or eating an orange. Very different women, but the process is not so very different. I'm always informed a lot by the written word, by what's on the page. Both of the women were fairly closely drawn on the page. How that thing that taps in and uses parts of myself and invents other things, I don't really know if I know how that operates or if I really even want to understand it entirely. I believe my women, and if the scriptwriter hasn't given me enough information to understand them and therefore believe them, I'll make it up. And so the process is no different. It's just tapping into my favorite thing to do. This is not my favorite thing to do. But I'm so glad you all came. I thought I'd come talk to you. But to have a role and to have clothing to wear and lines to say and someone's arc to understand and portray, that's my pleasure. So really it was kind of, in that way, exactly the same playing the two women.